I'm Veronica Lewis, and today on Let's Go Dutch, we're back in Amsterdam.
I'm gonna travel the world. I'm gonna go where the Dutch have been, and I'm gonna share it with you, my friends. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch. Let's go Dutch.
We'll stroll the streets of a once mighty maritime power. We'll see the city in a way you can only do on a repeat visit. We'll side trip to historic Muiderslot Castle, and then to one of Amsterdam's Golden Age rivals, Hoorn. So put on your clogs and let's go Dutch! We'll fly into Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, and from there, take the train into the city center. Amsterdam again. There's nothing like returning to a city you've been to before. You've done all the sightseeing things, so now you can just relax and be a local for a while. And of course, whatever you missed the first time around, you can see. After checking in, the first thing I like to do is rent a bike. I know you're jet lagged and tired, but one thing to never do is take a nap. So let's just ride around a bit. Just a few pointers. If you're around tram tracks, stay out of them. Cross them at angles. Also, don't stop short in the high traffic bike lanes. There could be a lot of bikes behind you. Okay, let's go Dutch. The area around Zeedijk in the Ouderzijks section is amongst the oldest of Amsterdam. Zeedijk, which means sea dike, was where the medieval wall was. The street itself was a moat and was later filled in when the city expanded. History at every turn. This is the Oost-Indische House. The Amsterdam Kamer of the VOC met in this elaborate Renaissance building. Back in 1606, this is where ventures were planned, crews assembled, and maps drawn up and studied. In 1602, the Dutch United East India Company was formed. Known by the initials VOC, they were largely responsible for the wealth that poured into Amsterdam during the Golden Age. Amsterdam was one of several cities with a chamber, known as a Kamer. Meeting in the Bevendhebbers Kamer, the directors discussed profits from VOC trading factories, shipbuilding, and when crews were hired, this is where they got their commission. Before we head on, there are two more things to point out. The first is that archway which leads to the Velserkerk.
This gate was designed in 1616 by Hendrik de Keyser. He was one of the master architects of Golden Age Amsterdam. He built this arch as a funeral procession entrance to the Velserkerk. Now, up on top, we have a perfect example of Amsterdam's Stadswappen. What appears to be three X's are actually St. Andrew's crosses. The shield comes from the Persane family who owned the area back in the 13th century.
The second thing I want to show you is this little house next door. In fact, it's called Het Kleinste House, the smallest house. It's 7 feet wide and 16 feet deep.
That giant mansion is the Trippenhouse. The Tripp brothers, who were 17th century weapons makers, built the house in 1660. On the facade, you can see various weapons and also the family coat of arms. Now, look real close because
Directly across the canal is another narrow house. Legend has it that the coachman of the Tripp brothers said,
If only I had a house as wide as their front door.
and so they built him a house as wide as their front door.
If only I had a house half as big as theirs.
How about a house like that one? That's the house op Prachtig, dating back to 1610. It faces 3 canals. The name means the house on 3 canals, and it was restored in the early 1900s. The architect doing the work used a 17th century painting by Gerrit Bergheder as his plans. That painting is in Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum. Hold on. I think Willem has found something.
Indeed, I have. Back in 1578, the Grand Hotel here was a hotel for princes and wealthy gentlemen. It was known as the Prinsenhof. When the original Stadthouse on Dam Square burned down in 1652, the Prinsenhof became the Stadthouse. It was only for 3 years, though, until het Koninklijk Paleis on Dam Square was finished, and then that became the Stadthouse.
I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, these houses sure are pretty, but what do they look like inside? Well, Amsterdam is a city full of museums, so I bet there's at least one canal house museum.
Yeah, this one.
This a one indeed. The museum Village Hothausen is a fantastic peek into the past. We start our tour down in the kitchen, where Willem the cook is busy preparing a special feast. Over in this side area, he had fish cooking up. Meanwhile, the guests have arrived. The ladies have assembled in the Dames Salon, where Louisa Hothausen is there to greet them. Her best friend Matilda Kleiman is of course there, along with her husband. He's a wealthy trader from Amsterdam. He, along with the other men, had been herded into the Herenkamer, where Abraham Willett eagerly showed off his latest acquisitions. He was an avid collector, and those with the finer eye were treated to his antique room. I'll show you that later, because Hendrik, the butler, just announced lunch is served, and so the guests head to the Eetkamer for a formal lunch. After lunch, the ladies adjourned to the Townkamer, the garden room. This was Louisa's tea room. The men, having already been dazzled by Abraham's painting collection in the blue room, now assemble in the antique room. Do you feel like you just stepped back 100 years? This room has all the characteristics of old Holland with the stained glass windows. Perhaps it wasn't a formal lunch the hosts were giving, but a mask ball. The pinnacle of the Frankenfile leanings of the Villa Trouthausens is here in the Louis XVI style Ballsaal, the ballroom. This was where their guests were treated to all sorts of events, from musical concerts, poetry and literary readings, to a Venetian-style mask ball. And when the night was done, they ascended this grand staircase to the Slaapkamer, where Neltje, the dienstmaid, had just finished warming the bed and laying out their PJs. The next morning, Louisa took her coffee out in the gardens, along with the dogs. It's quite a luxury having a garden in Amsterdam. Meanwhile, the coachman's bell is ringing. Herr Willet is heading out into town, and so are we. If you've been to Amsterdam before, you've no doubt walked by that tower and wondered, what is it?
It's called the Munttoren, the Mint Tower. In the Middle Ages, it's where they produced junior mints. Okay, they weren't junior mints at all, they were coins. The Munttoren was actually part of the medieval city walls, and there was a gate here. The gate burned down in 1618, but the base survived. The tower was added a year later. When the French occupied the Netherlands, the tower became the Mint.
Willem, technically we haven't had a word of the day yet.
She's right. Begijnhof.
Ah, yes. Begijnhof. Our word of the day. Our word of the day is Begijnhof. This peaceful courtyard we're in is the Begijnhof. A begijn is an unmarried woman who lives a monastic life, but unlike a nun, does not take monastic vows. The Begijnhof dates back to 1346, and in exchange for living in this community, the women tended to the poor and sick. Sitting in one corner of the Begijnhof is Het Houten House, the wooden house. Fire, as you can imagine, was not very friendly to the wooden houses of the Middle Ages. That's why it was decreed that only brick or stone be used to build houses. This 14th century house is the oldest wooden house in Amsterdam. And for our fans of Thanksgiving dinner, the Begijnhof is home to the Engelse Kerk, the English church. Back in 1609, the Pilgrims of Thanksgiving fame lived here in Amsterdam and worshipped at the Engelse Kerk. A year later, they moved to Leiden, where they lived for 10 years before doing the Mayflower thing. When leaving the Begijnhof, turn left. Here you will pass through the free Civic Guards Gallery. It's part of the Amsterdam Museum and gives a little taste of their collection. This painting is of Napoleon getting the keys to the city in 1811. The Amsterdam Stadswapen in the right corner marks Amsterdam's border. Napoleon was defeated just 4 years later, so give us back those keys. Here's another tip. Amsterdam has another free museum, Centraal Station. That's right, the train station. It's not just a classic European train station, but perhaps the best in all of Europe.
The world would be happier if men had the same capacity to be silent that they have to speak. The highest activity a human being can attain is learning for understanding, because to understand is to be free. Freedom is absolutely necessary for the progress in science and the liberal arts. If you want the past to be different from the present, study the past.
All of these were said by Baruch Spinoza. So, who exactly is Spinoza? He was a Dutch philosopher born in 1632, just a stone's throw away. He was a Jewish lens grinder by trade in Golden Age Amsterdam. His death in 1677 was attributed to the dust he was breathing. He was also a political thinker and a champion of freedom, democratic values, separation of church and state, and many more concepts woven into the fabric of modern thinking. Amsterdam is a great base for exploring Nederland. Trains fan out from Centraal Station in all directions, and the country is small enough to make traveling a breeze. Bike paths crisscross the country, and routes are clearly marked. One fantastic and gemakkelijk side trip is Muiderslot, just 15 minutes from Amsterdam. When you think of castles, what comes to mind?
England.
Yeah, anywhere else?
France.
Oui, another place.
Germany.
See, Holland isn't very known for castles, is it?
Daar staat een kasteel.
Dames and heren, I present to you Muiderslot.
Muiderslot was built in 1280 by Count Floris V. It was he who granted Amsterdam toll-free passage on the waterways in 1275. Amsterdam's town charter came later on in 1300, courtesy of the Bishop of Utrecht.
Floris was the son of Willem II, Count of Holland, and later King of the Holy Roman Empire. He was born in 1254 in Leiden and died close to here in 1296. He became Count of Holland, Zeeland, and Friesland and was beloved by the peasants. On the other hand, Floris had incurred the ire of the nobles due to his policies favoring trade and urban development. Hold on a second, I need to interrupt. We're going inside now. Floris was aligned with the House of Auvergne, part of the French court, and they had hostilities with the Counts of Flanders. In 1269, Floris married into the family of the Count of Flanders, and so he changed his allegiance. Later on, he once again found himself battling with the Counts of Flanders, but England's King Edward I persuaded him to stop, so as not to disrupt the lucrative wool trade. Hold on, I need to interrupt again. The next section has a lot of plot twists, so I want to give you a moment's rest before we proceed. Okay, onwards. When Edward moved the wool trade out of Holland to Flanders, Floris switched his allegiance to England's enemy, France. He then resumed his hostility with Flanders. Edward conspired with the Count of Flanders and other nobles to capture Floris. Out falcon hunting one June morning was the backdrop in which the conspiracy unfolded. Floris was imprisoned here in the castle he built, but ultimately killed when the townsfolk tried to intervene. Cut to the 17th century, and we find a new bailiff of Malden living in the castle, none other than poet, playwright, and historian Peter Corneliszoon Hooft. His friends who hung out here became known as the Muiderkrane. They included celebrated poets, writers, scientists, and composers. Jos van den Vondel was part of the Muiderkrane. I won't tell you I need to interrupt again. However, if I were to interrupt, I'd say we're heading out to the gardens now. Another gemakkelijk day trip I have planned for us is the mighty port city of Hoorn. Hoorn is north of Amsterdam and just a 40-minute train ride. As with many Dutch towns, the train station is very close to the old centrum. The VOC had a chamber in Hoorn, and their old warehouses are scattered about town. A good place to start our tour of Hoorn is at the harbor, where 1,000 ships launched the Dutch into history. The views at the harbor are quite prachtig, with the weathered merchant houses along Veermanskade and the Hoftoren keeping watch over the harbor. At the southern tip is a maritime museum, complete with a replica of Henry Hudson's ship, the Halve Maan. Close to the harbor is the main square, the Rode Steen. Dominating the square is the Waag and the stately West-Fries Museum. Housed in this magnificent Renaissance gabled building, the museum paints a splendid portrait of Golden Age Hoorn. Hoorn is a pretty little town and worth exploring in more detail. For now though, we moeten met de trein terug naar Amsterdam. In all the times I've been to Amsterdam, I've never tried Fibo. In the mood for a little fast food snack, Dutch style? Croquettes are big on the menu. The Dutch love croquettes. A little coin poppage. Press a button, and out comes something piping hot. I'm gonna let it cool for a moment. A viewer email.
Goed.
Dear Let's Go Dutch, is the Amstel River really beer?
Let's go see if it still is.
Goed idee. Okay, here goes. still beer. Prost! Well, that's all the time we have. I hope you've enjoyed our return to this wonderful city. I'm Veronica Lewis. Join us again next time on Let's Go Dutch as we explore more of Holland and beyond. Tot ziens!